I do hope that Alan Dershowitz is their representative, because that will be very cool.
Israel's defense minister has been outlining his plans for Gaza once its war with Hamas is over. It comes almost 3 months after Hamas's deadly October the 7th attacks on southern Israel, which triggered the conflict. Under Yoav Gallant's four-corner proposals, Hamas would no longer control Gaza and Israel would retain overall security control. A multinational force would take charge of rebuilding Gaza after its widespread destruction in Israeli bombing. Neighbouring Egypt would also have an unspecified role under the plan, but Gaza would be run by Palestinian bodies as long as they were not hostile towards Israel. While fighting in Gaza has continued alongside the plan's publication, the Hamas-run health ministry says that dozens of people have been killed in the past 24 hours. Let's go straight now to our correspondent Yolande Nell, who's in Jerusalem for us. So, Yolande, how does this plan tally with the ideas that the US was suggesting for the day after in Gaza?
Well, Washington, which is, of course, Israel's closest ally, has been calling consistently for a detailed plan for the day after. What we have at the moment is really a kind of set of bullet points from the defense minister. But there has been this insistence that it should be Palestinians who are governing in Gaza in the future. And this plan does account for that. It says specifically that there will be no Israeli civilian presence in the Gaza Strip at the end of the war. Now, that is important because you've had far-right ministers in Israel's coalition government who have been calling for the return of Jewish settlers to the Gaza Strip. There are some who've been calling for the forced displacement of Palestinians, and that is something.
I like that the ranges are just like ethnic cleansing, ethnic displacement, and then the most progressive position is like, let's do not even a Bantustan, but like, let's do the West Bank, basically. Like, that's the best position that the Gazans have to look forward to, is the occupying force strangling them further. Yeah, sick, man.
Thing that has stirred up a lot of anger around the region with other Arab countries, also with the Americans saying that that talk was inflammatory and irresponsible.
What about the Palestinians? What's their view on this?
There's been relatively little comment from the Palestinians so far, perhaps because this is really just the kind of sketch of a plan. We are going to have the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken coming in a few days' time, and he will be visiting Palestinian leaders in the Palestinian Authority in the occupied West Bank, as well as Israeli leaders. And we know that in the past, the US has been pushing for the Palestinian Authority, a kind of a revitalized Palestinian Authority, to have a role in the future of Gaza.
God, I want them to get punished so bad. I know ICJ is like, the most they can do is like get the UN to act. And ultimately, I guess it gives like people more reason to be like, no, saying that Israel is committing genocide is now official. These little things do matter still. Kind of like the sea change in the attitude where people went from unconditionally and vociferously supporting Israel to going, wait a minute, actually it is an apartheid state and that's kind of messed up, turned into a real thing in the Western world after institutions like NGOs, specifically like the Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, openly declared Israel to be an apartheid state. Now, that happened in 2021. But there is still an importance to these institutions actually calling it like it is. Okay? Straight up. I think that this was something that mattered for a lot of people because they got the go-ahead to be able to openly state it. Because you can always fall back on NGOs that do this for a living, that call the balls of strikes for a living, even if they themselves are not necessarily, always honest and open-minded, I would say. And I think that plays a big role. That plays a big role in changing public consciousness. The ICJ declaring what Israel is doing to be a genocide, which, according to former prosecutors who have successfully prosecuted other states for war crimes and genocide, crimes of genocide. The South African case is open and shut, which, obviously you guys know this already because you've been watching me cover this ethnic cleansing campaign. I think that if a decision comes down from this easy case that is ultimately seen as what Israel's doing is ethnic cleansing, this will change a lot of attitudes, I think. To understand why the International Criminal Court prosecutor Karim Khan's conduct regarding the situation in Palestine is so scandalous and should disqualify him from office, a little background is necessary. Wait, what? Israel has not ratified the Rome Statute and is not a state party. The ICC and this is a different thing. I think. Am I wrong? Isn't Israel going up? The South African case is not on the International Criminal Court. It's the ICJ, I think, right? Am I? Yeah. So there are differences between the ICC and the ICJ. So the ICC is the ICJ predates the ICC. The ICC is the International Criminal Court, is a permanent international tribunal that will try individuals responsible for the most serious international crimes. The ICJ is the International Court of Justice. The ICC just goes after African countries, right? No. The one of them was designed, I think, in like 1920s, and then the other one is 1945. ICC, I believe, was designed in or created in. Wait, let's see. Sorry. Nandre's steaks just got delivered. Nandre sent me a box of steaks. ICJ is where you take up violations of the Geneva Convention.
This news is funded by.
Yeah, we covered this already. I mean, I watched it already.
Thank you very much for having.
The International Court of Justice, ICJ, or the World Court, is a civil tribunal that hears disputes between countries. The ICC is a criminal tribunal that will prosecute individuals. The two ad hoc war crimes tribunals for the former Yugoslavia and Rwanda are similar to the ICC, but have limited geographical scope, while the ICC will be global in its reach. The ICC, as a permanent court, will also avoid the delay and startup costs of creating country-specific tribunals from scratch each time the need arises. Okay? I already ran the top of the hour ad break, and oh my God, so many gray names keep coming in here and asking me when Adam Friedland's coming on. Adam Friedland is coming on at 4 p.m. The ICC has its permanent seat in The Hague, the Netherlands. When necessary, it may also make arrangements to sit in other countries. Okay? But the U.S. and Israel are not a part of the ICC. It doesn't matter. So, I guess this goes into that a little bit, but yes. Israel is KO Fishy's right. Israel is a party to the Geneva Convention, which means that it can, as a state, be tried under ICJ, but it is not a party to the Rome Statutes, which means it cannot be tried at the International Criminal Court. Okay? Israel's not ratified the Rome Statute and is not a state party of the ICC, the global tribunal established in 2002 to hold accountable perpetrators of war crimes, crimes of aggression, crimes against humanity, and genocide. Of specific concern to Israel was that the Rome Statute in Article 8.2b defines as a war crime transferred directly or indirectly by the occupying power of parts of its own civilian population into the territory it occupies. Forcible relocation, or rather repopulating areas, is obviously considered a war crime, and that is exactly what settlements are in the West Bank, and that's exactly the foundation of the Israeli nation state. Okay, so they are not joining it, or the deportation or transfer of all parts of the occupied territory within and outside of its territory. This closely reflects Article 49 of the Geneva Convention, 1949, relative to the protection of civilian persons in time of war, which defines such activities as grave breach of the Convention's equivalent of a war crime. Other articles, such as 7.1J, define apartheid as a crime against humanity, and it became a serious concern more recently as the long-standing judgment of Palestinians on this matter was endorsed by the leading Israeli and international human rights organizations. Do you understand? Do you understand how these NGOs actually build a case, and how this case will then inevitably get elevated to international criminal courts? And then ultimately that causes pressure points for those in positions of power and the country, United States of America, Israel's most important, most significant ally and biggest backer, to actually have to take action. Now, it doesn't matter when America does war crimes and is like called out for said war crimes, right? Because it's still America. But Israel technically is not the United States of America. Although it functionally operates like an American state, it still is a separate state in and of itself. So this kind of pressure will work to basically cut the ties between Israel and America, because ultimately you don't want America to, at the global stage, take a position that is so pro-Israel and back Israel as is doing, clear misconduct, clear war crimes, crimes of genocide, the worst war crimes you can, because that diminishes its soft power capabilities globally. It makes America look very weak, right? So at that point, American leadership has to make a calculation. Do we allow Israel to consistently engage in these kinds of crimes and continue giving it weapons, and have the rest of the world completely just say, all right, it's done, you're over, your partners are behaving in a way that is, your partners are now behaving in a way that is worse than your behavior in some instances, right? Like you're aiding and abetting the genocide. This will lead to, because America is aiding and abetting the genocide, this will lead to additional criminal complications for the American government. Now, of course, the reality of the matter is that America is not a part of any of this. Technically, America even pulled out of the ICJ. America has never been a part of, I think, the ICC at all, because shortly after they wrote the Invasion of the Hague Act. For those of you who don't know, this was created specifically so that if any American service member, diplomat, if any American is ever extradited to The Hague to be tried, America will invade The Hague. That is a law that we have in the books. That's not true. All America is part of the ICJ. All UN members are. What did we do? What did Donald Trump do? I think it was... I think the United States sanctioned the International Court or something? Or no, U.S. lifts Trump's sanctions on the ICC prosecutor court official in 2021. Oh, okay. On September 2nd, 2020, the United States government imposed sanctions on the International Criminal Court prosecutor Fatou Bensouda and other senior prosecution official Fakiso Mochochoko. But then the following questions and answers discuss executive order on blocking property of certain persons associated with the International Criminal Court. U.S. officials added to the prosecutor's office specifically designated nationals and blocked persons list. Their designation had two immediate effects. First, any property held by Bensouda and Mochochoko as a property entity in any way they own, or 50% or more in the United States, became blocked. Second, all property that might belong to Bensouda or Mochochoko that comes within a U.S. jurisdiction would be blocked. Now, the United States has taken action against the United States has taken action against the International Criminal Court prosecutors. The U.S. has lifted Trump's sanctions on the ICC prosecutor. But ultimately, unlike the International Court of Justice, the PCIJ was not a part of the league, nor members of the league automatically are a part of its statute. The United States, which played a key role in both the Second Hague Peace Conference and the Paris Peace Conference, was notably not a member of the league. However, several of its nationals served as judges on the court. From its first session in 1922 until 1940, the PCIJ dealt with 29 interstate disputes and issued 27 advisory positions. The United States played a major role in setting up the World Court, but never joined. President Wilson, Harding, Coolidge, Hoover, and Roosevelt all supported membership, but it was impossible to get a two-thirds majority in the Senate for a treaty. Following a peak of activity in 1933, the PCIJ began to decline in its activities due to the growing international tension and isolationism that characterized the era. And then we lead to the International Court of Justice. I think this is what I was thinking of. The U.S. withdrawing from international accords says UN World Court is politicized. Yeah, this is the other thing that we did. The Trump administration on Wednesday pulled out of two international agreements after Iran and the Palestinians complained that the International Court of Justice and U.S. policies, the latest withdrawal by Washington from multilateral accords. The U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton slammed the highest United Nations tribunal as politicized and ineffective as he announced that the United States would review all international agreements that could expose it to binding decisions by the ICJ. Earlier on Wednesday, Supreme Court agreed to let Trump off the hook? What are you talking about? Is that breaking? Anyway. All right. Tehran had argued that the U.S. sanctions imposed since May by the Trump administration violate the terms of their 1955 Treaty of Amity, which is true. Washington responded by pulling out of the treaty, a little-known agreement that was signed long before Iran's 1979 Islamic Revolution that turned the two countries into arch enemies. The ICJ, based in The Hague in the Netherlands, is the United Nations venue for resolving disputes between nations. There have been mounting concerns among U.S. allies about the Trump administration's commitment to multilateralism. In the nearly 2 years since being elected, President Donald Trump has withdrawn the U.S. from a nuclear agreement between six powers and Iran, which was Obama's signature foreign policy accomplishment, the Iran denuclearization deal that I believe is the culmination of 12 years of unilateral agreements. And Trump just kind of threw it apart. They also ended up They also ended up following through. Iran ended up, according to UN investigators, following through on the conditions of the deal, regardless of Trump's pulling out. And then Trump still implemented sanctions. So this was like completely and utterly unimaginable, completely ridiculous. And Trump just kind of did it. It was yet another instance where Trump was not the peaceful doves that everyone claimed he was. Oh, Supreme Court agrees to weigh on whether Trump can be kicked off the ballot in Colorado. Got it. Yes, this is the American Service Members Protection Act, or colloquially called the Hague Invasion Act, but that's way before Trump. That's like 2002. Bolton, citing what he called Iran's abuse of the ICJ, said the United States would also withdraw from the optional protocol under the 1961 Vienna Convention of Diplomatic Relations. We will commence a review of all international agreements that may still expose the United States to perpetual binding jurisdiction, dispute resolution in the International Court of Justice. The United States will not sit idly by as baseless politicized claims are brought against us. So that's something that they did on top of basically having, completely controlling the Security Council with veto power. So although the International Criminal Courts and the International Court of Justice, okay, what? It's way more evidence than in the only other case ever won in the ICC. The lawyer who brought the case is friends with one who won that back against Yugoslavia, and he was on TMR saying, "This ain't nothing. My dad was in the Bosnian War when he supplied trucks." Okay, let me tell you something. Okay, I know the former prosecutor for the ICC went on both Democracy Now! And also later went on Majority Report to talk about how much of a banger of a court case this is, right? We covered it yesterday or 2 days ago. However, the issue is, okay, and there will be public hearings on Thursday and Friday in the case South Africa v. Israel, and we will be able to watch it live. It'll be kind of boring, though, most likely. However, here's the thing. I hate to say, this is a bit of a speculation from my end, but the court case that man won, he won against fundamentally an adversary of the Western world, okay? And not necessarily a offshoot of American power, like a organ of American dominance and American imperialism, because technically Israel is an organ of American imperialism. Therefore, Israel's actions are seen as permissible by the American State Department, and this opens up two different cases, two different avenues here. One, America has obviously broad powers in the Security Council that it exercises on a regular basis, at the behest of Israel routinely, but also, which it can in this circumstance as well, it has a lot of influence. And two, and perhaps even more importantly, if Israel were to be found guilty of the crime of genocide under the International Court of Justice, this would also open up additional scrutiny to America's involvement, because America is the funder and facilitator and perhaps the greatest supporter of Israel's genocide. And if judging by not the ICJ but ICC protocols in the past of those who were tried for the crimes of genocide, individuals that were tried for the crimes of genocide, what you must remember is that those, that extended not only to direct people in positions of power or those who even pulled the trigger, that extended criminal scrutiny to members of the media even, right? So because of that, I would assume America would want to do everything it can to stop that from happening. Because if the International Court of Justice swings against Israel, which in a normal court it would, okay, you would then have genuine individuals, like American individuals even, potentially prosecuted for cheerleading this genocide, right? Members of the American State Department. And that immediately goes back to America's invasion of The Hague. Now, that also, of course, would most likely not happen, but that diminishes America's power globally as well. So it's a real lose-lose situation for the United States of America. October 8th was the beginning of a major lose-lose situation for the U.S., okay? Because the moment Israel started conducting very openly an ethnic cleansing and ethnic displacement campaign, they started doing it with America's go-ahead, and they started doing it with America's weapons, right? So when America tried to step in the direction of Israel and try to rein them in, Israel continued doing it. And time again, what did America do? They said, care and consider for human rights, please, but also here's some more weapons. So America absolutely is complicit. Okay? It is a religious cleansing campaign, not ethnic. Wait, what? What are you talking about? Shut up. It's genocide. The peaceful countries are the most secular, blah, blah, blah. This is a religious war. No, it's not. It's not a religious war at all. Stop. Religion is simply a tool that every side uses in conflict. A ruling, Elant News says, a ruling by the court could have significant potential implications that are not only in the legal world, but practical, bilateral, multilateral, economic security ramifications. Reads the cable, a copy of which was obtained by Axios from 3 different Israeli officials. So the best, least worst option for America here is to either A, try to stop this from going through, which I don't even know if they would be able to, okay? Or I guess somehow motivate the outcome to ensure that Israel is not seen as doing genocide, right? Like, you have to somehow sabotage the court and the proceedings, or at least, like, manipulate the outcome somehow, right? And the issue is, if you don't do that, the second best, least worst option for America, if this court case goes through and Israel is found guilty of doing genocide, America has to cut ties, like 100%. And even then, it will be seen as America's weakness at the global stage, because all of a sudden, one of your organs of imperialism has been caught dead to rights, doing genocide with your weapons. Think about that. I don't believe this extended to even Saudi Arabia, which in a way that is not so dissimilar to what Israel is doing, did a ethnic cleansing and genocide campaign in Yemen with our weapons as a regional ally at the behest of America. But all of what I have described to you is precisely the reason why, despite how open and shut of a case this might be on the virtues, okay, it's still, not in America's interest, and therefore could swing in the opposite direction somehow. I don't know how, but I could foresee this being not as easy a case to win as the Bosnian one. I think that's the one he was talking about, right? The ICJ guy. That's it. You have an audience not only in the USA. You don't have to explain yourself all the time to white Karens. My audience is predominantly comprised of Americans who get very offended very quickly and will immediately drop you once you start making them question their own implicit internal biases about American hegemonic power. It's a big chunk. Foreign policy coverage. My foreign policy coverage is where I broadly, I would say, am almost antagonistic to the rest of like the supposed progressive left that you see online. It's caused a tremendous amount of conflict for someone like myself because Americans don't want to question that. I can get an American to question white supremacy despite being born into a white supremacist country and have white supremacist attitudes. I can question an American citizen on transphobia and get them to, change their minds on that. But the moment I start talking about like America being the number one nation on the planet, the moment that like American hegemony is threatened, a lot of chatters turn the other way. A lot of American chatters don't want to hear that. Even ones who are open-minded enough to sit back, take a deep breath, and like, relearn. Come on, bro, that's not why. What? No, that's 100% true. It's the most significant thing. It's the most significant thing that like is so broadly, so powerful. It's impossible to get chatters to question their own implicit biases on this matter. Hold on. I want to run the majority report video. But anyway, here, let's watch
the Palestinian Authority is the body that governs parts of the West Bank. But on the Palestinian side, it has proved to be unpopular. Palestinians have been saying in polls that really it would take a kind of a different look to the makeup of the Palestinian Authority they see at the moment for them to be convinced that it could be put in control of the Gaza Strip as well.
And how difficult would it be to assemble the multinational force that Israel is talking about? Who would be part of it?
I mean, that, of course, is still to be discussed. There's so much still to be discussed with this plan. Perhaps not surprising it's saying that the US would take a lead role here. It has already been so much involved in this war. But I expect that they will be looking to international bodies, to the UN agencies that already have a big role in getting humanitarian aid into Gaza and already have had historically a long presence in the Gaza Strip to be very involved in the reconstruction efforts. But it's sort of made clear by other statements from the Israeli defense minister that Israel would insist that it still has security checks on all materials that are going into Gaza, and there have been calls too for reinforcement to
not the progressive left online. It's progressive content creators whose foreign policy views are at odds with your own. It's the other normal leftists that didn't get their politics from a fucking YouTuber or debate streamer know that these are basic anti-imperialist talking points. Yeah, but I think America's hegemonic power waning is a genuine existential threat to a lot of people. And I think the overwhelming majority of propaganda, even from ostensibly like liberal leaning outlets, right, is still very much pro-America. There's bipartisan consensus on being pro-America unconditionally in every orifice of American society. This is precisely the reason why it's the hardest thing to unlearn, in my opinion. Harder even than in some instances, white supremacy, because ultimately there are liberal outlets, liberal organs of propaganda that at least talk about white supremacy and its dangers, right? Whereas America's hegemonic power is unquestioned. America's enemies are evil. America's hegemonic power is unquestionable. It's the good. America is the world police, and that's a good thing. And if America wasn't the world police, that would be a bad thing. No matter what, especially in the post-9/11 universe that we live in, many people internalize that and actually feel that way. That's why one thing that you hear from a lot of supposed liberals or supposed progressives is like, well, America is bad, but it's less bad than, Rwanda. And it's like, dude, your comparison is insane. Like comparing the United States of America's actions across the board globally to the actions of state actors that are marginal, tiny, engaging in local crimes, like hyper-localized crimes of ethnic cleansing sometimes, for sure, is ridiculous. Okay? We have systematized genocide at the global scale in many places. And if not genocide, a permanent maintenance of American dominance, American capitalist dominance particularly. And it's done through regular organs of democracy in the Western world. So it's not even seen as something that is outside the norm. Right? Like, people at most will say America and China is the same, not realizing that, like, China is a relatively new power player in the game and still has a long time and a massive amount of violence to do to catch up to America's historic crimes and even contemporary crimes. Okay?
To stop smuggling across the border with Egypt, because there's a lot of concern about how Hamas and other armed groups in Gaza have brought in weapons or weapons parts in the past.
We know that the US Secretary of State, as you mentioned earlier, Antony Blinken, is going to be having talks again. How is it going? Because at the moment, Israel hasn't seemed to have listened at all on the US's request to try and scale back some of the operations in Gaza to try and protect human life and also allow more humanitarian aid in. How is that discussion going to go, given that Israel hasn't changed its methods at the moment?
Well, it's interesting that at the top of the list of what Antony Blinken says he wants to achieve in this region is the protection of civilians in Israel, the West Bank and Gaza, he says. And we know, of course, that there have been these calls from the US to lower the intensity of the operations in Gaza because of the high numbers of civilians being killed. Now, what we have seen is Israel saying that it's starting to pull out some of its ground forces, its combat troops. But at the same time, we have seen in recent days still very heavy bombardment of the Gaza Strip and heavy shelling as well, and that is continuing to cause high numbers of civilian casualties.
Yulan Nell, for the latest there from Jerusalem. Thank you very much.
Anyway. It's pretty crazy. Even when I was briefly mentioning what I was mentioning about, like, America being bad, while we're talking about Israel's war crimes being conducted with American support, there's still people being like, ugh, here we go again, talking about how bad America is. And I think it's an intellectually incurious attitude to have, to just simply state, oh, Hasan doesn't have any real opinions on the matter. He's just a campist, or he just says America bad and just leaves it there. I don't leave it there. So you should probably question why that is your immediate predisposition. Why is it that is your immediate reaction? Straight up. In a lot of instances, like, the secondary thing that you do after you get mad at, like, oh, Hasan always says America bad, is to try and find some other country that is also doing something bad, right? By whatever standard you have applied to them, with whatever information you have on it. And then you go, well, what about this happening here? What about that happening there? You try to all lives matter the situation. And you do it without even thinking about it. And it's hilarious that your view is not radical at all in the rest of the world. Yes. And it's so sad to see such reactionary sentiment from Western leftists who think they are real socialists, you know? You think this is easy for Israelis? What do you mean? Anyway. People think you're pro-China because they perceive you as doing that with them. It's pure projection. They thought the same for Russia. Every single time I talked about Russian war crimes, I would say Russia is behaving like America does. And people that personally believe that what America is doing is ultimately for some greater good would get very upset at that. And from where I was standing, no, I was saying like that's the worst thing you can do. Any American exceptionals, liberal who defends NATO and U.S. imperialism isn't a fucking leftist. We shouldn't give them that label. While I agree with that, I'm not talking to professionals who defend it professionally and make money off of that defense. I'm talking about people who watch those people and have those kinds of biases, because my goal is to challenge those biases and have those people change their perspective. Why I do what I do. That's it. Anyway. And this is the other cop out. So my argument is that these other countries could take the place of America and commit the same atrocities. They could. Kind of nihilistic, but better us than them because we live here. And I want my friends and family to be safe. This, my friend, is the same exact attitude that slave owners had. I'm being nice. Slave owners thought once the African men and women were freed, they would rebel against their masters and kill them. This is precisely what every single decolonial movement has faced. The challenge and the fears that they have faced. The notion that like every single country, if given the opportunity, in South Africa, once the ANC comes to power and black people can have equal rights, they're going to kill all the whites. And historically speaking, oftentimes that unimaginable amount of violence that the oppressors routinely subject the oppressed to is not dished out in retaliation. No matter how violent the revolution might be, once order is established and there is no more need for violence, usually in an effort for stability, usually what ends up happening is people chill out. And this is a very conservative way of thinking. It's the same principle behind, for example, white people in the United States of America, no matter what that whiteness means, right? It's a political concept. We're not talking about like people with pale skin, right? White people are afraid of no longer being the majority, right? Why are they afraid of no longer being the majority? Well, because they're worried that if they become the minority, then somehow they will be treated in the same way that they have historically treated other non-white people. It's just projection. It's the same kind of reactionary projection. Just like when I say, with respect to Israel, Israel's supposed national security concerns, okay, in the form of a potential genocide that might happen to Israelis, hypothetically in the future somehow, in the minds of the Israeli population, cannot outweigh or cannot necessitate and create conditions that allow for a current, very real genocide to happen to the Palestinian population. You can't look at the future and be like, well, there might be future crimes that are far, far worse, and that's why we have to do the crimes right now that we're doing. That's not how that works. That's my perspective.